itself a lot. After those days, you go, shall I say, I went to Italy and I started my really great career, and the main career. Then you learn to really become a musician. After a singer, you have to put your instrument to the service of music, not only to the bel canto, to the duty and the line of music. Then on, you really become, or you strive to become a musician. In other words, the main instrument of the orchestra.
Yes.
Which is probably, not probably, it is exactly the meaning of prima donna. Prima donna would be first woman. As you are a woman, you are the prima donna of the performance.
And all this you were learning, really, at the time you first went to Italy?
Yes, I learned that with Maestro Serafin.
I've always thought that was the one lucky thing that happened to you.
Yes, that was one of the many lucky things, and maybe the really lucky things, because he taught me that there must be an expression, there must be a justification. He taught me exactly the depth of music,
and this was
the justification of music. That is where I really, really drank all I could from this man.
He was, after all, the first maestro you worked with in Italy.
He was the first, and I'm afraid that he's the last of those kind of maestri.
Very few Italian conductors had a more distinguished career than did Tullio Serafin, and perhaps none, apart from Toscanini, more influence. His career spans the entire century, short of a year or two. His time at La Scala alone spread over 40 years, and at Covent Garden with some gaps over 53 years. He conducted at the Met, in Chicago, in South America, and he was artistic director in Rome from 1934 to 43, perhaps his most distinguished and uncompromising period. Above all, Serafin was a singer's conductor.
What I learned from Serafin was that you must serve music, because music is so enormous and can envelop you into such a state of perpetual anxiety and torture, but it is our first and main duty. He always found a reason for something. What he said impressed me was, when one wants to find a gesture, when you want to find how to act on stage, all you have to do is listen to the music. The composer has already seen to that. If you take the trouble to really listen with your soul and with your ears, and I say soul and ears because the mind must work, but not too much also, you will find every gesture there. And it's so true, you know.
In fact, acting production is a musical thing in opera. That's what it
is.
It becomes the basis of
It is
music.
all one reflex, usually. It is one enormous reflex with many, many reflexes put together, which comes back to what we were saying before, that by the time you're on stage dealing with music as a, no more an amateur musician, but a professional, serious musician, you must have no more surprises.
You, in fact, have had, in your early career in Italy, something approaching surprises, but not on the stage, more in choice of repertory. Weren't you engaged to sing Wagner and find yourself singing Bellini? I don't mean by mistake, but in the course of the season.
Well, it was nearly by mistake. I mean, it's by a miracle, shall we say. Yes, it's true. I was doing Valkyria, which was my second year at the Fenice of Venice. And I remember there was a great, shall we say, an influenza fever or epidemic. And they were without soprano for Puritani of Bellini. And poor old Serafin was exhausted, desperate. He couldn't find this singer and that singer. We didn't know what to do in the evening, so we were just, sight reading the role and playing around with the music. So his wife heard me singing the aria, sight reading the aria. And she came in, it was in his apartment, Maestro Serafin's apartment. She said, will you do me a favor? When my husband comes in fact, she didn't call him my husband, she says, Tullio comes in. She says, will you please sing that for him? I said, well, if it'll please him and make him happier, yes. In fact, I did when he came back. He never said a word. The next day, 10 o'clock in the morning, was after already my first performance of Valkyria. I think the next day, or the evening, I think the same evening we had the second Valkyria. And I was called on the telephone, please put your robe and come down, or come up, whatever it was. Master Serafin. I said, Master, I'm not washed up, it'll take me about half an hour. He said, no, come down the way you are. Of course, we wouldn't even say no to, it was sort of a veneration for the Master then. And I went down, and he said, sing. I said, what? Sing what you sang to me yesterday. There was the director of the theater, Catozzo then, and I said, anyway, I was forced to sing the aria, and sight read, of course, which was the second time or third time I sight read it. I heard them talking, and he says to me, well, look, Maria, you're going to do this role in a week. I said, I'm going to do what in a week? He says, you're going to sing Puritani in a week. I undertake that you study it. But I said, I can't. I have 3 more Valkyrias. Can't do it. It's ridiculous that I sing Puritani. He says, I guarantee you that you can. So I thought to myself, well, if a man like Serafin, who is no child, knows his job, can guarantee me a thing like that, I will be no fool to say no. And I said, well, Maestro, my best I can do. More than my best, I cannot promise. If I manage to learn the part with my performances of Valkyria and time, Valkyria, not Siglinde, Brunhilde.
Brunhilde.
I point out. And he says, all right, I guarantee you that, and you guarantee me that you try. That's good enough for me. So I said, well, inside of myself, if they're crazy enough to think that, then I was still young, and you know, being young, you have to gamble. There is when my experience and my schooling days came handy.
Yes.
Because I was already prepared for all the tricks.
You could have shocks, but not surprises.
No surprises, and no shocks even. Because, you see, Wagner is much easier to sing, frankly.
In a way, yes, of course.
In every way. When I used to sing Isolde and I used to sing Brunhilde, there was no comparison with the Bellini roles or even the Donizetti. Because they're much less exposed and much less difficult. But the basis is the schooling of bel canto, to sing whatever you sing.
When you get a new role, a new part
Yes.
suggested to you, will you sing, will you consider singing such and such an opera by so-and-so? What happens to you then?
Well, then, it's a very matter-of-fact. You really have to put your feet on your ground and be very matter-of-fact in the beginning. You look at the role, as we know how to read and write, we know how to read our music. We're supposed to. So you read a role, and in the beginning you're enthused, you're exalted, and you say, well, I have a way of my own. This way I've learned from my teacher De Hidalgo and also from Serafin, which are the major people in my life. They have taught me, and life has taught me, that the last act is the most important. Because no matter how much and how well you've sung on the very few, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 first acts, if the last act is not superior to all the rest, well, you might as well not sing it. We have sung frequently roles that do not have the best last act, but I essentially choose an opera where at the end the last impression is the best.
So you get the score and you go through
First
with
of all,
particular
because we
attention to the
warm
end.
up.
You
read
go
it
through the score and
yes,
see
you
how
go
it
through
feels.
the score, so you have a brief look at it. And you say briefly, well, to sum it up in 2 minutes, shall we say, or what it takes, yes, I would like to do it. Now, once you say yes, then you take it, act by act, and you, first of all, say, what is she? Does the characterization, how can I say, the person agree with the music. You put the music together with the personaggio, and you try to make them agree. Frequently, they do agree. Then you take the music and you learn it as you were in the conservatoire. In other words, exactly as it's written, nothing more and nothing less, which is the phrase that I call straitjacketing.
Absolutely, strictly in tempo and everything.
Exactly, strictly how the composer wrote it. The conductor gives you his cuts, gives you his possibilities. If you have cadenzas, he gives you ideas about what his cadenzas would be. And his cadenzas, I mean, are never his if he's a conscientious conductor. He always builds his cadenzas according to the taste and the liking and the particular makings of the composer.
Of course, yes.
Because Bellini is quite different from Donizetti. Donizetti is quite different from Rossini, and so forth and so on. And the composers felt that if you're dealing with sentiments, with characters, with music, let us deal with less florid things, or rather let us use embellishments to the service of expressions. In fact, in the later years of Verdi, even Bellini, shall we say even Donizetti, if you care that much for the composers and not for your own private success, if you really care to look into the music, you will always find a trill or an embellishment or a scale that justifies an expression of feeling of happiness or of unhappiness, of uneasiness, anxiety. There is always a reason for such thing. Then you learn the role exactly as A, B, C, D. And when you've learned that, then you try to speak it to yourself, as you have the recitative. By recitative, what do we mean? Speaking. They are the introductions to the arias. Usually. Once upon a time, 150 years ago, the public just used to walk out, eat, laugh, I don't know, used to stay eternally in the theater and would come in for the big pieces. Thank heavens now they don't. So the composers are much more respected now than once upon a time.
Yes.
The recitative are frequently very attractive and very difficult to give a, shall we say, a rhythm, because all music has a certain rhythm. By rhythm, I don't mean the way it's written exactly, because once you learn how it's written and the exact value of each note and each phrase, then, and this I have learned from Serafin in occasion of my Norma, when I auditioned. So he said, very well, you know the music perfectly well. Now you go home, my dear Miss Kаллас, and speak it to yourself. Keep on speaking, and let's see if, with what proportions, with what rhythm you come back to me tomorrow. Because if you speak it to yourself, how would you do it in music? Forget that you're singing and these are the values. Respect the values, but try to be free for a minute. If you spoke these phrases, how would you speak them? According to Bellini's style and this and that. And on that, you cultivated yourself, which is so true. The recitative must have a certain flowing rhythm. What you give at a certain point, yes. You give back, you take here, you give back there. And the characterization of Italian music is always a flowing movement, no matter how slow things goes, no matter how slow a rhythm. So once you get that in your mind, and it's not done in one day, it's not done in 1 week, and in fact I don't think it's ever finished, because an interpreter grows each year.
Exactly. You've matured it subconsciously.
Your subconscious has matured it and has made it his own, so it helps you out. And it has managed to mature the role, and in other words, then, having broken this down completely, then you can take wings. By taking wings, I mean from down to earth, 2 and 2 makes 4, because everything must be logical in opera, because you can't persuade the public of a preposterous thing. Of course, what is the main thing that musicians should do is give it the most credibility possible, and to persuade the public. of its reality.
There we come
and
back.
to take them over. As I say, opera is something that has been dead quite a while ago. So if we really don't try our very best to give it much seriousness and much persuasiveness and dignity, you know, it's not taken in with pleasure.
When you're working on a new part, at what stage do you ask for collaboration? You obviously need a pianist fairly early on.
Definitely, yes.
As
A
well at
pianist,
the same
yes.
time.
A pianist that can be very, very, shall we say, very particular in teaching you to remind you exactly the values of notes and not let one slip you. You learn the role, you roughly learn it, as I say, because this goes in stages. You cannot expect to learn it immediately. You have to give it time to be learned, to be matured, and then leave it, and then retake it, and then after that, it depends whether you have lots of time. If you have lots of time, it can take you even months, but it can take me very little also. Depends. Then you need the company. That usually happens after about 2 weeks' time, or yes. Then all are called for a rehearsal, the first piano rehearsal. Then you start. I usually...
That's with the maestro, with the conductor?
Yes, but with your other colleagues also.
Yes.
I used to, in my early years, I always did, in fact. I used to look at the posters and ask and see when the maestro, the conductor, had his readings.
With the orchestra?
With the orchestra, because I'm short-sighted, and I cannot depend on cues given to me by the conductor himself or the prompter. So also because I live into the music, and I used to assist to his readings, which is most interesting. So therefore I went when I was quite prepared. Then we're all terrified, because it's, you know, to put so many people together is really quite terrifying.
That's when all the things that have stuck together start to fall apart.
Well,
or can do.
Can and do frequently. And in old operas, like I say old operas, mine like La Norma or Traviata, always, nearly always, and I can't say always, at certain points of the chorus, I know exactly where they're going to stop. I know exactly where they're going to repeat the same things for over and over again. One would say, all over the world. There are certain parts that stick, shall we say. You can't get rid of them. So, finally, you build the whole thing together. Stage, orchestra, colleagues, orchestra, chorus. And in the meantime, you try on your costumes. You've already seen the designs. Then eventually you reach, with a lot of quarreling between the conductor and the stage director, no, this is my rehearsal, no, this is my rehearsal. Well, all right, I can't stop all the time because we have to measure, you know, the space and breathing and this rhythm of the thing. We also have to measure, because still, up to this point, we have not sung the opera and performed the opera straight through. Because you have to do that more than 3 or 4 times.
Yes.
Because you should measure your strength, where you can rest, where you can get away with lots of things. You really have to exactly know where you stand.
When do you start actually singing with full voice? Because you don't do that all the way through, do you, in rehearsal?
There is one thing that you must do. You really must, from the very first rehearsals, orchestra rehearsals, absolutely must sing in full voice. For your own sake, for your colleagues' sake. And the main thing is to test your own possibilities.
Yes.
Finally, you reach the stage where you wear your costumes for the first time, the antiprova generale, that you really try to sing the whole thing, possibly with no interruptions, throughout.
Wearing costumes for the first time then?
Wearing costumes for the first time, which is disastrous, normally. I had another method, though, that if they could prepare them for me sooner, I always wore them a bit before, and I asked if it were possible during certain rehearsals to get used to them, if it was a difficult costume to get used to. So at this stage again, which probably is about 18 to 20 days by now, you are at the, shall we say, 5 days before the performance. They give the anteprova generale, and...
That's the first dress rehearsal.
First dress rehearsal. Then you have your dress rehearsal, the full dress rehearsal. There's no stopping unless it's something terribly, just like a performance with the critics. So you sing throughout with no interruption as it was a performance. Then they give you normally not less than 2 days, not more than 3 days before a performance. One day you are practically sick, you're so tired. The second day you rewind, and the third day you're ready to go. Then after the first performance, real good solid work starts, because then you fill in the blank points. You have made practically a rough sketching, because it can never be the real sketch unless you have had so much time. But there's nothing like stage performances that can fill in the little...
Stage performances in front of an audience.
In front of an audience, that you test yourself, your colleagues, the orchestra. It's the intangible things that are so beautiful about music.
You talked about studying, working on the individual character, the person that you're going to sing and represent on the stage. When you start work on that, when you actually tackle it, do you do it mostly from the score, from the notes, or from the libretto, or from what approach to the character?
The libretto with the... For instance, let us talk about Anna Bolena.
Yes.
Which is something...
Anne Boleyn, yes.
Anne Boleyn is by Donizetti, as you well know, and history has his story of Anne Boleyn,
yes,
which is quite different from the Donizetti Anne Boleyn. Donizetti has made her a sublime woman, a victim of circumstances, and nearly a heroine.
Yes, it's a romantic view of history, maybe.
Exactly. So I couldn't bother with history after a while, because it really completely ruined my insight of it. So I had to really go by the music and by Donizetti's libretto. The music itself justifies it. So the main thing, I believe, is not the libretto, is mainly, though I give enormous attention to the words, I try to find truth in the music. Then you work the role as years go by, if you care to really work hard. So eventually, with the years, you even can change hairdos, you can change costumes. My Traviata has changed frequently. My Norma, more or less, not much. It has, but not that much, because Norma doesn't stand that much. Medea has changed, definitely.
Yes.
A lot. Because I've seen her a very static figure, a very barbaric creature that knows what she wants from the beginning. And as I grew, I learned to know that Medea, though she was a very nasty character, after all, though, Giasone was even worse than she was.
She was right,
and she was right.
At least in her motives.
In her motives.
Yes, not in all her actions.
So I thought later on that if I created a softer hairdo and a softer appearance, that I might really create her as more of a woman, a living woman. If you don't persuade the public that you believe in the role and whatever gesture you do is true, Maybe you're not right. But so long as you persuade the public that it's so. As the opera goes on, the less she moved, logically also her kind of sickness would not permit much movement also. So towards the third and fourth act, the less she moved, the more the music gained and the more the role gained. Also the public, I can afford little movement.
Certainly.
And towards the last act, I had preferred also a sort of a useless movement, like trying to fetch something, whatever it was, a useless gesture like trying to get the mirror or something on the dressing table and not being able to, and always just dropping the hand because you couldn't quite manage it. Like the breathing should have been shorter, it should have been more, the coloring of the voice should have been a little more tired. In fact, I had, without the critics knowing it, I had a compliment paid to me by saying that the coloring of my voice, in other words, they wouldn't know how, but the critics said that Kala's in Traviata appeared to us tired.
In the last act?
Generally.
Generally, yes.
Yes, and especially in the last act. This was a compliment for me because I struggled so hard to find this particular quiet, rather little tired quality that I wanted, and it took a long time to have it. And it's dangerous
Yes.
work also, because it's like on a little thread that can break from one minute to the other, the sound you want. Some detail, something that I wish to say that I will never forget what Serafin told me about Isolde when he insisted upon my having some wonderful costumes made, and I promise you I didn't have the money to make them then. He says, you must have beautiful costumes, and especially in these operas that are static. I said, yes, but why that? Why do you insist? And he says, I'll tell you why. For an hour and 10 minutes, the public has nothing to do but look at you. If you don't really fascinate them with your voice, and no matter how much you fascinate them with your voice and your role, they still have all the time, which means an hour and 10 minutes, to cut you to pieces. Take your costume and cut it to pieces. So if you don't really give it the best, you're in for disaster. So at least the vision of what they get should be harmonious, should be nice, like the music that you give them. When music fails to agree to the ear, in other words, to soothe the ear and the heart and the senses, then it has missed its point. That's why I don't agree with modern music. Because whatever bothers the nervous system, especially music that was and is, I'm sure, created for soothing purposes, you've missed your point. Music should be essentially simple, and upon simplicity and beauty of line, it can become great. I think that it's very difficult to top a Verdi, a
Yes.
Bellini, a Rossini, a Donizetti, though intellectuals can say, oh, but they're so old-fashioned. There's nothing old-fashioned other than performers.
You've said before now that you thought of opera as being in some way a dead form. Were you really thinking of the whole operatic art, so to speak, or the operas written 100 years and more ago, the sort of operas that you've mostly sung?
I'm afraid it's true that I think it's dead in this sense that you can't very well imagine today of today singing I love you and singing I hate you or whatever feeling. It can be spoken, it can be screamed, but it's out of style to sing it, frankly.
Well, that's convention, of course.
You
isn't it?
sing of happiness, but you just sing no words, probably. And that's what I mean also because it was quite old-fashioned, I feel. And we haven't done much to modernize it also. Our attitude is quite old-fashioned, though we cannot modernize opera too much, because as it is, we must accept it. It is old-fashioned. We must give it a bit of fresh air, cut certain lengthy music, repetitions, try to bring our movements down to the least possible, the most credible to the audience, to create an atmosphere that we can really take them over, make it as credible as we can. Well, I think I said before, and I repeat again, that the first duty of a singer, of a musician, is to create what, or rather to try to feel what the composer wanted. I have two minds. One, the mind that creates, that has to do what she's supposed to, or what it's supposed to, and then I try to detach myself to become the audience, or somebody that looks upon this other person creating.
The performer's mind and a
and
critical
it happens
mind,
all along, it goes along hand in hand. The person, the creator, shall we say, or rather the performer, because we are not creators, we are performers. We try to be faithful, and where we think that the composer may have failed, well, then we can give it a bit of fresh air, a bit of life, which is what I mean by opera being dead. So we give it a breath of life, even if the composer maybe didn't feel it then, because as life goes on, time has changed. Life has become more modern. 100 years ago, things were, even jokes were more easy. Today, people are more serious. You can't fool them that much.
You talked about cutting out, or doing without long stretches that we thought were boring. Do you believe in that?
I believe absolutely in that. I believe in repetition of a melody is usually never good. The sooner you come to the point, in other words, the better it is, if you have any point to come to. And you must always, in other words, you begin, even a phrase, when you speak, once you start, there will be, of course, a legato. Even in speaking, then the phrase will end, you will breathe. This is a continuous movement of breathing also, and of singing. What do? We sing, we speak on music form. This is opera. The first time is the only time, never risk a second time. So mainly music also must be an instrument of theater.
For instance, Sonambula at the end, surely you did Ananjunje twice, didn't
that
you?
Is different. That's a showpiece. That is quite different. And then there exactly is what I say. It's a complete expression of happiness, of joy.
Yes.
There, vocalizing is justified.
Yes.
Because the whole piece is a little naive, shall we say. Not all music is really delicious of every composer. There are certain points, certain parts of the opera, even in Verdi, who was much later than Donizetti and Rossini, that today are tiresome. You always have to be the performer in function of the composer that the public will listen to. And you must make it a success.
Yes.
So this changes because 100 years ago the public was different. They used to dress different, they used to think differently. Now the public dresses differently, thinks differently, and we must act accordingly, though keeping always the atmosphere and the poetry, the mysticism, what makes theater work. This is what we learn from old people, what I learned from old Serafin, to always prepare a phrase, to always dig deeper into what the composer wanted, and how he felt, and how he used to struggle on one phrase to show the horror or the love or the poetry. All this atmosphere.
But now that's real, that's not old-fashioned, that's not dead.
Well, feeling is real.
Feeling is real.
Feeling was always real. And I feel that deep feeling, honest feeling, is and always will be.